Thanks all for those who don't know me, I'm Chris Torres. I'm the Vice President at APA. The negotiating committee, prior to the closing of the ratification vote for our current contract, our new contract, they did a roadshow. It was an outstanding presentation. These slides came from that. It was originally about 2.5 hours long and 150 some odd slides. So I condensed that down to about 13 or 14 slides to hit the important and the big ticket items that we got in this, and also to emphasize that for those of you who are in here who are no longer with American, you may be eligible, because there was a lot of questions about whether you're eligible for effectively the retro pay that we got. So I'll hit on all of that. You can go to the next one, please, Ellen. All right, so right off the bat here, pay rates. The pay rates that we got are industry leading. What we ended up doing was Delta ratified their contract before we did. We matched all of their pay rates with the exception of the Airbus, the XLR, the Neo, and the MAX 10. Now, we don't have XLRs or MAX 10s yet, but when we get those, those pay rates are in excess of Delta. So matching or better to Delta. As you can see there, it's a 4-year contract, and by the end of by the amenable date, we'll have seen 5 raises, 2 401k increases in 3 years and 4 months, which is a 44% increase from the start. And if you consider the snap up that we have with United, you're looking at almost a 50% pay raise. There's some pay rate increases, so we get 21% on August 1st, May 2nd, and there's an asterisk there, I'll come back to that in a second, a 5% raise, the next year a 4% raise, the next year a 4% raise. And the last one you see there is something we got that nobody else has right now, which is an amenable date raise. So in other words, the contracts don't end, they become amenable. So when this contract is amenable, when we can go into negotiations for the next one, we have a baked in 3% raise right off the get-go there. Now, the reason you see those asterisks on May 2nd is that is what is currently in the contract, and that was based off the negotiations. But if United ratifies their contract, and it's set to, their vote is scheduled to close, I think it's on the 29th of this month. If they ratify their contract before the 1st of January, all of those dates in May are going to shift back to January. So the pay raises will be effective January going forward. Go ahead and go to the next one. So there's a couple provisions in here along with this. This is generally what we have grouped into what we call retro. It's not true retro based on the 401k contributions. So we call it a one-time payment. What they've done is they've gone back, they've taken the eligible earnings from 2020, 4% of that, 4% of the eligible earnings from 2021, and then 14% of the earnings from 2022. That is set to be paid on October 4th. For anybody who is still active with American, that'll come through the normal direct deposit. For anybody who is no longer with American but had eligible earnings during those years, that's going to come with a paper check, and I'll talk about that in a couple slides here. Go to the next one, please. All right, so the next one is a ratification bonus. Similar to that one-time payment, but this is just everything that occurred in this year. It goes back to January. You're going to get, math in public, I think it's 7 separate checks. So it's a check or a direct deposit for each of those months. And what they've done is the first portion of payments is going to be from May, June, and July, and that's going to be within 60 days. And one of the things I think it was on the slide, but I didn't mention it. I did mention it. October 4th is when that other back payment is going to occur. So these first 3 payments are going to occur no later than 60 days from date of signing. Date of signing is the 31st of August. The next set of payments, January, February, March, April, those are going to occur in January of 2024 and no later than the 24th of January 2024. So again, that's 21% of the difference between what was earned in all of those months, or what was earned at 21%. Yeah, and then again, even if you're no longer on active status, as long as you had eligible earnings during those times, you are eligible for those payments. Go to the next one. All right, so for the folks who are no longer employed at American, like I said, you're going to receive a paper check. We are going to be reaching out to everybody to confirm your mailing address. That is going to start in October. So one thing that you can do is you can go into APA, just confirm that whatever contact information you have in your member profile in APA is still accurate, because that's what we're going to use to reach out to you to confirm that. And what we're going to ask you to do is we're going to ask you to confirm your address by sending it to that address confirmation at alliedpilots.org. And in the coming months, as we start this process, you can expect that we'll be sending something out to folks who are no longer with American, just just to let them know that, hey, this is the process that we're going to be doing. All right, so, and before I forget, down here on the table, I brought a bunch of flyers there from the Retirements and Benefits Committee email blast that went out to our members. The sort of the focus of it is on 401k, which if you're retired, you don't so much care about, but it does describe those two payments, and it describes all the associated dates and the percentages that go along with those. So feel free to come grab one of those. All right, so some additional compensation. I talked about the United Snap-Up, and to explain that with a little bit more detail, what United has in their contract and what Delta has in their contract is a snap-up to pay rates. So we didn't bake into our contract an automatic snap-up to either of those. What it says is, because Delta had already ratified and United was about to do it, we said if United ratifies by this date, by January 1st, we will then snap to them. Delta's is a United plus one, and United has a snap back to Delta. So how this works is, United ratifies, Delta snaps to 1% above them, and then United snaps back to that 1%. So it's a 2% overall increase, and then we snap to that. So what you're going to see is, if United ratifies, and I have talked to nobody who thinks United is not going to ratify, that'll be an additional 2% pay raise to what we got. I talked about I touched on the 401k increases, so increased to 17%, and then 18% in 2024 and 2026 respectively. Those dates you see there, those will also go back to January, just like our pay rate increases if United ratifies. So there are three things that are tied to the United ratification: the snap-up, the moving of pay, annual pay increases to January, and the moving of those 401k increases back to January. We've also what's called a market-based cash balance plan. That effectively, when you hit the 401k maximum contributions, you basically think of it as a spillover into this, I want to say that acronym, MBCBP, that's almost harder to say than market-based cash balance plan. The concept of the program is built. The details need to be approved by the IRS. Hopefully we can get that going sometime next year. I think the company, once it's IRS approved, I think the company has 60 days to implement it. Profit sharing, 10% if the company makes up to 2.5 billion, and then 20% if they make over 2.5 billion. Sequence protection. So I'll get into some scheduling stuff here. I know most folks they're all about the money, but there's some good scheduling improvements that we got in here. For anybody who had to do sequence protection RO, it was horrible, it was confusing, it was convoluted. We've greatly simplified it. We've made it a much easier process. So we used to have this, maybe I'm on the hook for 3 hours, maybe it's 4 hours, maybe it's my flight duty period. It's just 4 hours now. If something happens to your trip, if it cancels, if you go illegal, if you misconnect, they got 4 hours. And not only do they only have 4 hours, they only have 4 hours for the entirety of fixing your trip. So if you got a 4-day trip that completely cancels, they got to fill up all those 4 days within 4 hours. And if they don't, you're off the hook. Totally pay protected. You can do a thing called self-repair. You can do this all the way up to the day prior where, again, let's say the whole thing cancels. You don't want to wait to get RO. You just go in and pick up whatever flying you want. And if you fill at least 50% of the hours that you were supposed to fly, fully pay protected, no further RO. So let's say it was a 21-hour trip, and you picked up a 2-day worth 10 and a half hours. You're done. And those last 2 days, not only are you not currently flying, but they're not credited. You are paid, they're not credited, so you can double dip. You can go fly on top of that and basically get twice the pay. You'll be able to see pilots who are in RO, kind of like you could see the reserve list. Now you can see who has RO, so there's a little bit of, I wouldn't say trust but verify with crew scheduling. I don't know that I trust them at all, but at least you can verify what's on there. There's provisions for, if your sequence doesn't maintain continuity. One of the big issues was, if your sequence doesn't maintain continuity, there's nothing you can do with it. You can't trade it, you can't drop it, it causes a big problem. You're still not going to be able to trade it away, but if they can't fix it by the point that continuity break occurs, you're done. You're done with the trip, and you're off, and you're paid for the rest of it. If something cancels, but it maintains continuity, so let's say I had a 4-day trip, and right in the middle, I'm going to go Dallas, I'm going to do a Tulsa overnight, and come back to Dallas the next day. Let's say both of those legs cancel. So the sequence maintains continuity because I get to Dallas, and then I leave Dallas the next day. It just goes off your schedule. You go home. Nothing to do that day, you rejoin your trip. And if you're a commuter, they get you a hotel. The replacement flying window, this is one of the biggest points of consternation with our pilots. It was very long. So if you are broadly described a narrow body or domestic type of pilot, you had that 4-hour window or 0159 where they could keep giving you flying. So in other words, if I had a trip that ended with a red eye at 6 in the morning, I'm on the hook till almost 2 a.m. the next day. That's gone. It's just 4 hours. If you were a wide body type or certain narrow body flying south of the equator in Hawaii and stuff, they'd have you for 30 hours. It doesn't matter if you never actually went to that destination. It doesn't matter if they weren't going to assign you more. It was just 30 hours. So first we've shortened that to 24 hours, and they have to actually send you to one of those destinations, one of those long haul destinations, in order to use that 24-hour window. Otherwise, it's just 4 hours. You can go to the next one. Reassignments. Used to be you only got paid for a reassignment if they took you beyond the footprint of your trip. Now, the reassignment premium pay starts immediately, and reserves now get paid for reassignments. We've got a grievance that's 5 years old and about to be resolved because the company didn't feel they should pay reserves for reassignments. Reserves and line holders will now get paid the minute their reassignment starts until they are rejoined with their trip, so it's trip ownership. And if they take you into an additional flight duty period, that premium pay goes from 50% to 100%. Again, until they either get you back to your trip or until your trip ends. They will stack on other pay provisions, so if you're already on a premium trip and then you get reassigned, that's reassignment premium pay on top of the premium pay. And if they give you a reassignment and it conflicts with a follow-on trip, kind of like the RO, they've got 4 hours to fix that illegality. Otherwise, the second trip removed, paid but not credited. It's called OP over projection. So again, you can go double dip on that trip after you've already been paid for it. All right, extended sick bank. So one of the biggest things, all the way down to the very final days of getting to an agreement in principle, we had 3 things that we really went to the mat on, and one of them was sick time. The company was absolutely adamant that they could not give us any more sick time beyond the 5 hours a month that we already get. And it wasn't just a money thing, it was a headcount thing, because they can show that our pilots right now are using more sick on an annual basis than they are accruing. And the reason is because our trip trading systems are horrible. They're locked down. The only way pilots can get their trips on is by calling sick. Okay? Or you have folks that are approaching retirement and they got a lot of sick in their bank. They shouldn't be taking it with them. So what are they doing? They're calling out sick. So we try to explain that to the company. Hey, look, fix the trip trading. And I'm going to explain here in a little bit, and then you can now, there is a payout for that sick time. That will fix the sick problem. It wouldn't do it. So the solution that we came up with, and I have to give credit to United because we borrowed this concept, is what's called an extended sick bank. Every pilot will get 120 hours loaded into this extended sick bank. And you cannot use this extended sick bank to just call out on the average trip. If you have an LTD qualifying event, you can use the extended sick bank. You can't use it for the first 15 hours of flying that's removed, but then after that, you can start to tap into that. So one of the things with LTD is we've shortened the bridge from LTD from 90 days to 60 days, but if you don't have enough sick time to get you there, you can use that sick bank. You can use it on top of your sick. You can use it to augment your sick. Once you go on to LTD, you can continue to tap into that ESB to augment the pay. Once you come back from LTD, you can get up to 180 hours at a time, and you could use all that 180 hours when you go out on an LTD qualifying event. You don't have to go out on LTD. Long-term disability. So you could break your leg. You know, that's something that could take you to LTD. That would qualify for the extended sick bank. Once you come back, that sick bank, both your sick bank and the extended sick bank will start to accrue again, both at the same rate of 5 hours a month. If you were to go out with another, in the future, LTD qualifying event, you tap right back into that extended sick bank to the extent that it's filled up. So it can go to a max of 180 hours, and it will refill up to 540 hours over the course of your career. So we didn't get the 1 additional hour per month of sick that we were looking for, but in the long run, for the sake of LTD, this is far more beneficial. All right, so talked about long-term disability. For the existing LTD plans, and Mike, this is what I was talking about, the monthly benefit for every pilot who is currently on LTD will increase by 30%, and they've removed all of the remaining offsets. A while back, we removed the Social Security offsets. This takes all of the offsets out. Also, pilots who are on LTE plans, you can work as a SIN-P now Previously, there was conflicts with LTD where your LTD payments would stop if you wanted to work as a SIMP. That's now removed. So anybody in LTD can go across the street, they can work in the SIM building as a SIMP, a SIM instructor. All right, for the new LTD plan, so anybody who goes out on LTD after the date of signing, previously, the LTD payment was 60% of, basically 60% of your salary, which is based on a 12-month look back, to a cap of $8,000. We changed that to a 50% cap, 50% of the pay with no cap. So who is adversely affected by that, for the most part, is the new hires. So folks who aren't making quite as much, but when you go to the top end of the scale and the Group 4 captains, that's a huge increase. And again, there are no offsets. I mentioned earlier, the elimination period went from 90 to 60 days. So in other words, I go out sick, I cannot begin LTD and the associated benefits for 90 days. We've drawn that back to 60 days, which will preserve some of that sick time. For mental and nervous diagnosis, those were previously only a 24-month LTD benefit, and then they stopped. Those are now lifetime. And now LTD benefits are going to be eligible for 401k contributions. All right, so the next few slides, it's kind of I'm just going to throw a bunch of extra stuff in here, and then I can take some questions. We got a lot of override improvements. So international override increased from $6 an hour to $8 an hour. We now have a long-range narrow-body override that applies to the XLR, the Neo, and the MAX 10. And so what that would be is, once our I might confuse these. So that is an override on those aircraft, and that's what I was talking about with the pay rates that will surpass Delta. And then we have a long-haul narrow-body override. So that would be if they use one of those aircraft and, let's say, go to a long-haul destination like Europe, for example. It's an additional override on top of that. So theoretically, you could get all three of those overrides stacked depending on what kind of trip you do. Life insurance is up to $750,000. Reserves, it's big deal getting flown into a DFP, a duty-free period, a day off. There was no compensation, you just lost the day. Now, if they fly you into a day off, first off, you're going to get paid 5 hours and 15 minutes over guarantee, and they will move that day somewhere later in the month, so you don't lose it. So you get paid and you don't lose it. And if you say, you know what, I really don't need that day off, I'd like an additional $515. If you give up that day entirely, you'll get an additional $515. So you get up to 10 and a half hours pay for being flown into a day off. For folks going TDY, there was kind of a convoluted system for the per diem in terms of the pay rate, and you also had to pick which hotels you went to. What the company said is, look, let's make it easy. Overall, you're going to come out ahead if we just pay you a flat rate of $2,000 for the month to go TDY. And if you decline the hotel, maybe you know somebody who lives there, you got relatives in town, you're going to crash on their couch, they'll give you $2,000 on top of that. Training pay increased from 4 hours to 5 hours a day. Vacation up to 35 hours for the top of the scale. So at the 19-year point, you're going to get up to 35 hours, and that will continue until you retire. Distance learning used to pay 1 hour for every 2 hours that you did. Now it pays 1 hour for every 1.5 hours that you do. And one more. Deadheads. Your seats were just sort of, get them where you can. Now there's no restrictions. They used to lock out those main cabin extra seats. Deadheading, we get those main cabin extra seats if they're available. Also, as soon as we check in, we're at the top of the upgrade list, to include platinum, all the other upgrades. We are at the top of the upgrade list. And used to be, your deadhead would only pay schedule. So if I'm doing a deadhead, let's say I flew out to Chicago, now I'm deadheading back to Dallas. We push off the gate and we hold. Ramp, lightning, whatever. So now we're on the ground for an hour. Now we get airborne, we're heading back to Dallas, and now there's a ramp stop there, there's lightning over the field or whatever. So we hold for an hour. So what was about a 2.5 hour flight turns into a 4.5 hour flight. Under the previous rules, you get 2.5 hours. Under the new rules, because you're paid block or better for a deadhead like you are with a flight, you would get that 4.5 hours. A bunch of premium improvements. There is holiday pay for 9 holidays. If you have any flying that just touches the day, that's $515 of pay, either over reserve guarantee or just on top of your line value. The company can designate premium at 50, 75, or 100%. So if they're not getting any takers at 50, they crank it up to 75. If they're still not getting any takers, they can crank it all the way up to 100. And they can designate premium days. So if something crazy happens, for those who remember Green Christmas, Green July, if things are going haywire and the company just goes, you know what, everything's premium. It has to be the entire system has to go premium. They just hit a button, and everything that everybody flies on that day, the trip was already yours, is premium. For folks who are sitting reserve in those 4 locations, DC, LA, New York, and Miami, they're going to give them $300 in co-terminal expenses. So I'm sitting reserve in LaGuardia in my crash pad, and I get called out to go to Newark. That's a pretty hefty Uber ride. So you'll be reimbursed up to $300. If you are reassigned, so let's say I've got a trip, the next bullet, supposed to finish at 4 p.m., I've got my deadhead to go home because I'm a commuter. If I get reassigned or if I get RO that takes me beyond that, and now I can't catch a flight home, I am A, going to get a hotel, and I'm B, going to get a positive space flight back the next day. And then the last one, the RHRA, so I talked about selling your sick time back. Prior to this contract, there used to be a provision, it ended in 2019, that said, if you want to sell your sick time back at retirement, we'll pay you $25 an hour. That was horrible. I always, when somebody would call me and say, hey, I'm about to retire, I'd say, stop, how much sick time do you have? That went away in 2019, so you were paid nothing if you try to take it with you. Now, the company agreed to a 66% sellback. Not everybody's going to take it, but there will be folks who do, and that'll take you up to $200,000, a maximum of $200,000. And the alternative to that is if you don't want to take the cash out, you can put it into that RHRA. So I think that's it. All right, that was kind of quick, but I mostly want to be able to have time to take some questions if you guys have. Go ahead. Is there any change in the non-rev passes? No, the non-rev passes are not a contractually negotiated benefit.
Do you expect any improvement in the TTOT?
Oh, great question. So do you expect any improvement in TTOT? No, because TTOT doesn't exist anymore. We got rid of it about a year ago, and I'll give a little bit of a backstory here. In 2015, when the JCBA was ratified, there was no TTOT. It was just TTS. It was about that much language. It was about 3/4 of the page. It was very non-descriptive. There was not a whole lot of details. And when they tried to go active with it, we realized that, oh, holy cow, there's actually not a real-time trading provision in this. It was 2 runs a day, that's it. So there was much revolt against that. We got TTOT turned back on through an agreement letter. This is when Keith Wilson was the president. But in exchange for that, we agreed to let the company not implement items that were in the new contract, which is why we had so many unimplemented items. So that's the first reason. So TTOT is no longer. TTS is presenting very similar problems as TTOT. The trips are locked down, pilots are unable to trade. This is one of the things that the negotiating committee, not directly with TTS, but they tried to approach. The scheduling committee continues to try to work at that to fix it. Some of the folks in the company recognize that it would actually be better for them to allow this trading to occur, but right now we're not seeing any progress on that.
The month-to-month leagues that were offered in 2020 and 2021, can you confirm those are considered eligible earnings for the regulator?
I'm not going to tell you 100%, but as far as I'm aware, those are eligible. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be.
It's non-rev travel. They let these paid people stop charging them to change their flights. That ruins all the non-rev numbers.
I don't non-rev anymore. I don't, my wife and I, when we want to travel, we don't go standby.
That's
It's
what I'm
horrible.
saying. Is that going to be like that from now on out, or that have they, has the company said anything about it? Whether they'll start charging?
So again, this is where you get into, more of the finance and planning. I mean, the question is, anything going to be done about the non-rev travel? It's pretty much worthless with how the company will switch flights around and they'll drop prices, and there is nothing that's being discussed in terms of fixing that. And really, there's not a whole lot that they could do specific to the pilot group that I could think of. I'm sure you could get creative. It would be something that would apply to all the work groups. But I mean, in the end, if they don't do that, that's a revenue loss. So you got to think of a creative way to fix it without affecting their bottom line. That's it. Easy crowd.
Just my makeup.
Oh, that's so wrong. Okay, so the question was, the check airmen were getting a different package and they're not getting as much money as the pilots. I don't know who told you that, but never listen to that again. The check airmen are going to be the best paid pilot group in this pilot group through the duration of this contract. And in fact, I'm glad you brought that up. I didn't talk about that just because it is a kind of a niche thing. The check airman starting back, I was a DFW rep, and I remember going to a check airman meeting with John Dara, was the chair of the check airman committee. At that time, he was pounding the table talking about how terrible the work rules are. The check airmen are governed by Section 12 in our contract. It is kind of their own little carve out. That section had not been improved since I believe it was 2003. It has stayed the same, no improvement to work rules or anything. So prior to that, the check airman had I think it was a 92-hour and 22-month guarantee. So it's far beyond what the average line pilot was paid. The problem is they could fly well beyond that, and they're still getting paid $92.22. You know, they could be called into work on their days off. They're still getting paid $92.22. I always looked at the check airmen as basically highly paid but more abused reserves. That was our bargaining chip, our primary bargaining chip with the company, because the check airmen started quitting, and good on them, because that gave us huge leverage. In 2021, I believe it was, we had 80 check airmen quit. And the company, the check airman position went from a position of, you gotta know somebody who knows what a talented aviator you are, to they were literally cold calling captains with the minimum requirements and asking them to be check airmen. And it should come as no surprise that once they did that, pilots weren't making it through the check airman upgrade program. They were failing out. So the company recognized that they needed to improve the work rules to not only regain the check airmen that they had lost, but also attract the highest caliber of pilots into that role. I do not remember all of the specifics other than, let me give you some generals. So there is an instructor pilot concept that is there now. This is an individual whose only duties will be schoolhouse work. You can be a first officer and be an instructor pilot. You will not evaluate and you will not fly the line as an instructor, as a check airman. You would do things like ground school, and you would do instructing but not evaluating check airman duties in the simulator, because the evaluations remain with the APD. So that's sort of the first step in being a check airman. FOs and captains can do it, but you're paid you're paid FO 12-year pay in your bid status. The next step up from that is the line check pilots. That's the closest thing that aligns to the check airmen, to the L types. So this is the type that generally will be out line flying and doing OE type of rides, checkouts. And then the final is the I don't know if they call it the APD, but it's the APD. It's the evaluator. So it's sort of a graduated step up of experience, if you will. I don't remember all the pay other than to say I think the highest with all of the overrides added in, it's like 124 hours a month. They will bid, the APDs will still retain the same concept, but the line check pilots will bid normally in PBS. That was a big thing the check airmen wanted. They go do things like pick up premium on their days off. And then what they'll do is, and this also helps with the blocked OE trips, if anybody remembers that. They would go in and block all these operating experience trips, and pilots couldn't bid on them. So now, those line check pilots will bid normally in PBS. And when they get assigned a student, they're just gonna go fly whatever trips on their schedule. They may have to displace somebody off to put the student on there, but that again reduces those blocked OE trips. I know there's a bunch more. Again, I didn't bring it up because it is a little bit of a smaller scope, but they are very, very well compensated. Who else?
Chris, would you happen to know the pay rates from when we took the pay cuts in 2023? Does this get American pilots back to that level?
When we took the pay cuts
in 2003, when we lost the 23%, is this getting us back to that level, or what's the?
And then some. I mean, because if you just, like I said, and you might have missed it in the very beginning, by the end of this contract, with the United Snap Up, it ends up being a 47% raise. All right, I won't keep you guys here if that's all you got. All right, cool. I got to head out. Thanks, everybody. And again, there's some information down here for whoever wants to grab it.